WorldComEDU. Elite Children's Classics.
Through the Looking Glass. Looking Glass House. Alice was curled up in a big armchair. The little black kitten was playing with a ball of yarn, rolling it round and round the room. "You bad little kitten," said Alice. She picked up the wool and the kitten and returned to her chair. She tried to roll up the wool again, but the kitten wanted to play. "All right, kitty," said Alice. "Let's pretend we're kings and queens. You'll be the Red Queen." And Alice took the Red Queen off the chessboard to show the kitten. But the kitten refused to fold its arms like the chess queen. Alice gave the kitten a kiss and held it up to the big mirror over the fireplace. "If you're not good, I'll put you right through this looking glass. Would you like to live in Looking Glass House, kitty?" As she spoke, the glass began to melt, just like a silver cloud. Alice quickly passed through the glass and jumped into the looking glass room. She was surprised to see some chessmen in the ashes of the fireplace because they were walking around 2 by 2. "Here are the Red King and Queen," Alice whispered, "and the White King and Queen. I don't think they can hear or see me. I feel invisible." One of the little white pawns was lying on a table, kicking and squeaking. "It's my darling child," cried the White Queen. She knocked the king into the ashes as she ran past and tried to climb up the table leg. Alice picked the queen up and put her on the table next to her screaming baby. The queen sat down out of breath. She hugged little Lily in silence, but when she could speak again, she called to the king, "Watch out for the volcano." "What volcano?" the king asked. "It blew me up here," said the queen. When the White King tried to climb up the table leg, Alice said, "I'd better help you too." She picked him up carefully, but before she put him down, she blew the ashes off of him. The king was too surprised to speak. His eyes and his mouth got large and round. "Oh, please don't open your mouth so wide, my dear," she laughed. "The ashes will get into it." Then she placed him near the queen. The king fell flat on his back and didn't move. Alice was worried, but he finally sat up and whispered to the queen, "I shall never, never forget it. It made my whiskers turn cold." "You haven't got any whiskers," answered the queen. Alice wanted to see the rest of the house. "I'll begin in the garden," she thought. She started to run, but soon she was floating gently down some stairs without touching the ground. When she stopped, she was dizzy, but glad to be on her feet again. The Garden of Live Flowers. "I could see much better from that hill," said Alice to herself. "I think this path goes straight up." But no, it twisted and turned. She tried another and another, but she always ended up where she started. "This time, I'll surely reach the top," she said. But the path gave a sudden shake, and poor Alice was back at the beginning again. Finally, she came to a large flower bed. Alice spoke to one of the flowers. "Oh, Tiger Lily, I wish you could talk." "We can talk," said the Tiger Lily, "when we want to." Alice was shocked. She said in a whisper, "Can all the flowers talk?" "Just as well as you can," said Tiger Lily, "and a lot louder." The rose added, "You're the right color, but your face is not very clever." "She'd be all right," said Tiger Lily, "if her petals curled up." Alice didn't like having her hair called petals. Suddenly, all the daisies started shouting. "Be quiet, all of you!" cried the Tiger Lily. "Oh, those daisies know I can't touch them, or they wouldn't dare make so much noise." Alice bent down and whispered to the daisies, "If you don't stop that noise, I'll pick you." There was silence at once. "Why can you all talk so well?" asked Alice. "In most gardens," said Tiger Lily, "the flower beds are too soft, so the flowers are always asleep." "I never thought of that," said Alice. "Maybe you never think at all," the rose said rudely. Alice pretended not to hear this. "Are there any other people in the garden?" she asked. "There's another flower that moves like you," said the rose. "Oh, is she a little girl too?" asked Alice hopefully. "Well, she is redder than you, and her petals are up on her head, not hanging down like yours." "Does she ever come here?" asked Alice. "She's coming now," cried the larkspur. "She's walking. Thump, thump, thump." Alice looked, and there was the Red Queen. But now she was taller than Alice. When Alice started to meet her, the Queen disappeared. This time, Alice had a new idea. She walked backwards, and in 1 minute, she was face to face with the Red Queen. "Where are you going?" asked the Queen. "Speak nicely." "I have lost my way," Alice explained. "It's not your way," said the Red Queen. "All the ways around here belong to me. Why did you come?" Before Alice could speak, the Queen looked at her watch and said, "It's time to answer. Open your mouth wider and always say Your Majesty." "I only wanted to see the garden, Your Majesty." "Good girl," said the Queen, patting Alice on the head. They walked in silence to the top of the hill. What a strange country lay below. There were brooks and green hedges which crossed each other, making squares. "It's just like a big chessboard," said Alice. She clapped her hands with excitement when she saw men moving about. "It's like a game of chess. What fun! I'd like to be one of the queens." The Red Queen smiled and said, "When you reach the 8th square, you'll be a queen." Then she grabbed Alice's hand and began to run. She kept crying, "Faster, faster!" But poor Alice couldn't go any faster. And finally, Alice cried, "Are we nearly there?" "Of course not. We passed it 10 minutes ago." "Faster!" shouted the Queen. Suddenly they stopped. Alice was dizzy and out of breath. "You may rest now," said the Queen kindly. "Why, we've been here all the time," said Alice in surprise. "Of course," said the Queen. Well, in our country, if you run fast, you get somewhere else. Huh, said the Queen. What a slow country. Alice watched the Queen walking away. She turned once and said, "You must go very quickly through the 3rd square by railroad to the 4th square. It belongs to Tweedledum and Tweedledee. The 5th square is water, and the 6th square belongs to Humpty Dumpty. The 7th square is all forest, and in the 8th square we shall be queens together." Then she was gone. Looking-glass insects. Alice ran down the hill and jumped over a little brook. Suddenly, she found herself in a railroad car. A guard was asking for tickets. Everybody held out tickets bigger than themselves. "Don't keep me waiting, child. Show your ticket," said the guard angrily. "I haven't got one," said a frightened Alice. Just then, the engine gave a loud whistle, and everyone jumped. A horse, sitting next to Alice, put his head out of the window. "Don't worry," he said. "We're just going to jump over a brook." In another moment, Alice felt the train rise straight up in the air. It was frightening, but it took her to the 4th square. The train disappeared, and she found herself sitting under a tree while a giant gnat, as big as a chicken, was fanning her with its wings. "Don't you like insects?" the gnat asked. "I'm a little afraid of them, but I know the names of some." "Go ahead and tell me," said the gnat. "Well, there's the horsefly," began Alice. "Right," said the gnat. "There's a rocking horsefly on that tree." "And there's the butterfly," continued Alice. "Correct. You can see the bread and butterfly over your head. Its wings are slices of bread and butter. Its body is a crust, and its head is a lump of sugar." Alice started to name another, but the gnat had disappeared. It was getting cold, so Alice started to walk. She passed through a dark wood where things had no name. Even Alice couldn't remember her name at all. She finally came to a field and said with delight, "Now I know my name once more. Alice, Alice, I won't forget it again." Soon she found a sign marked Tweedledum's and Tweedledee's house. "I'll just stop to say hello, because I want to get to square 8 before dark." Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Alice turned a corner and saw 2 little fat men standing perfectly still with their arms around each other's neck. One had Dum on his collar and the other had Dee. She decided that Tweedle must be on the back of their shirts. "If you think we're dolls," said Dum suddenly, "you should pay." "And," said Dee, "if you think we're alive, you should speak." But at that moment, Alice was remembering an old song. Tweedledum and Tweedledee agreed to have a battle, for Tweedledum said Tweedledee had spoiled his nice new rattle. Just then flew down a monstrous crow as black as a tar barrel, which frightened both the heroes so they quite forgot their quarrel. "Excuse me," said Alice politely. "I was wondering if you can tell me which way to go." "First, you should say, 'How do you do?' and shake hands," cried Tweedledum. So she took hold of one hand each, and they all danced around in a circle. 2 of the dancers were fat, so 4 times around was enough. "I hope you're not too tired," Alice said. "Nope, but thanks for asking." Just then, Alice heard something that sounded like a lion. "Oh, that's only the Red King snoring," said the brothers, and they led her to where the king was sleeping. "Isn't he a lovely sight?" said Tweedledum. Alice didn't think so. He was lying in a heap and snoring loudly. "He's dreaming about you," Tweedledee exclaimed. "If he stops, you'll be out like a candle. You're not real, you know." "I am real," said Alice, beginning to cry. "I hope you don't think those are real tears," said Tweedledum. "I know they're talking nonsense," Alice thought to herself, "and it's foolish to cry about it." So she brushed away her tears and went on as cheerfully as she could. "Is it going to rain?" asked Alice, because Tweedledum had opened a large umbrella over his brother and himself. "I don't think it will rain under here," said Dee. "But how about outside?" asked Alice. "It might, but we don't care," they said. Alice thought that was very selfish, and she started to leave. All at once, Tweedledum jumped up and grabbed her hand. He pointed to something small and white on the ground. "Do you see that?" he screamed. "It's only an old broken baby's rattle," said Alice. Tweedledum stamped his feet. "It's spoiled," he shouted, and he glared at Tweedledee, who was trying to hide under the umbrella. Alice said softly, "You don't have to be angry about an old rattle." "It's not old. I bought it yesterday. My nice new rattle." Tweedledee rolled over inside the umbrella with only his head sticking out. He lay there opening and shutting his mouth like a fish. "Do you agree to have a battle?" roared Tweedledum. "Oh, I suppose so," sighed the other, and he crawled out of the umbrella. "But she must help us dress up." The 2 brothers walked off, hand in hand, into the woods, and returned with their arms full of blankets, rugs, dish covers, and cooking pots. "Are you good at pinning and tying? Every one of these things must go on us." When Alice finished, they looked like 2 bundles of old clothes. "Am I very pale?" asked Tweedledum. Alice had just tied a saucepan on his head. "Maybe a little," replied Alice gently. "I'm very brave, but today I have a headache." "And I've got a toothache," said Tweedledee. "Then don't fight," said Alice hopefully. "We must fight, at least until dinner time." "But we only have one sword, you know. You can use the umbrella, Dee. It's sharp." It was getting dark very suddenly. "What a black cloud," said Alice. "And it's coming so fast. Look, it has wings." "It's the crow!" shrieked Tweedledum, and the 2 brothers ran off at full speed. Alice hid behind a big tree, but the crow flapped its wings so hard it was like a typhoon. "Oh, somebody's shawl is blowing away," said Alice. Wool and water. Alice caught the shawl, and soon the White Queen came flying through the wood with both arms stretched out. The Queen's clothes were all crooked and full of pins. Alice helped her put her shawl on and smoothed her hair. Just then, the wind caught the Queen's shawl again and blew it across the brook. The Queen spread her arms and flew after it. "I've got it," she cried. "Now I'll pin it on by myself much better." "Better! Better! Bah!" Her voice got higher and higher until she sounded very much like a sheep. Alice looked at the Queen and rubbed her eyes. What had happened? She was in a shop, and a sheep was sitting by a chair knitting. The sheep looked at Alice through a large pair of glasses. "What do you want to buy?" she asked. "May I look all around first?" "You can't look all around unless you have eyes in the back of your head," said the sheep. Every time Alice tried to touch something, it floated away. The sheep was knitting with 14 pairs of needles. "Can you row?" the sheep asked, handing Alice a pair of knitting needles. "Yes, a little, but not with needles." Suddenly, however, they were in a small boat, and the needles had turned into oars. They drifted down the stream for a while until the sheep said again, "Now what do you want to buy?" The boat and the river had all disappeared, and she was back in the little dark shop. "I'd like an egg, please," said Alice. The sheep put Alice's money in a box, but before she could pick up the egg on a shelf, Alice found herself by a brook. Humpty Dumpty. The egg was sitting on top of a high wall with its legs crossed. It had gotten larger and larger, and it had eyes and a nose and a mouth. In fact, it was Humpty Dumpty himself. Alice softly sang to herself. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. "Don't stand there talking to yourself," said Humpty Dumpty. "Tell me your name and your business." "My name is Alice, but—" "It's a stupid name. What does it mean?" "Does it have to mean something?" asked Alice. "Of course," laughed Humpty Dumpty. "Don't you think you'd be safer down on the ground?" said Alice, changing the subject. "Of course I don't think so. If I fall, the king has promised me to send all his horses and all his men," Alice added helpfully. "You've been listening at doors," Humpty Dumpty cried angrily. "No, I haven't," said Alice. "It's in a book." "Oh ho! So they write about me in books? Well, the king promised that all his horses and all his men would pick me up in a minute if I fall." "What a beautiful belt you have," said Alice. Or is it a cravat? Of course it's a cravat, silly child. The White King and Queen gave it to me for an unbirthday present. What's an unbirthday present? It's a present you get when it isn't your birthday. But I like birthday presents, said Alice. How many days are there in a year? Asked Humpty Dumpty. 365. And how many birthdays do you have? 1. Well then, there are 364 days you can get unbirthday presents. That's glory for you. What do you mean by glory? Asked Alice. Humpty Dumpty smiled. Glory means there's a nice knockdown argument for you. But glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument, said Alice. Words mean exactly what I want them to mean, said Humpty Dumpty. I'm their master. Of course, they do get angry sometimes. Adjectives are easy, but not the verbs. They're the proudest. However, this is all impenetrability. Oh dear, said Alice. What does impenetrability mean? It means, said Humpty Dumpty, that you should tell me what you are going to do next. I don't think you are going to stay here the rest of your life, are you? Does impenetrability mean all that? Words that do a lot of work for me get extra pay. All the words come here every Saturday to get paid. Well, that's all. Goodbye, said Humpty Dumpty. Alice replied cheerfully, Goodbye until we meet again. We won't meet again because I wouldn't recognize you. If you had 2 eyes on one side of your nose and your mouth on top, it would help. That wouldn't look nice, said Alice, and she walked away. She hadn't gone far when she heard a terrible crash. The Lion and the Unicorn. Soldiers and horses came running towards her and filled the whole forest. They kept falling over each other, and the ground was covered with heaps of men and horses. Alice hurried away, and soon she found the White King writing in a notebook. Did you see any soldiers, my dear? I promised Humpty Dumpty I would send them all, the king said. Yes, said Alice, I saw several thousand. 4,207 exactly, said the king, checking his notebook. Can you see any messengers coming back from town? Yes, I see somebody, but he's coming very slowly. He's skipping and wriggling like an eel. Oh yes, he does that when he's happy. His name is Hager. That reminded Alice of a game she liked to play. I love my love with an H because he is happy. I hate him with an H because he is horrible. I feed him with ham and hay, and his name is Hager. Just then the messenger arrived, but instead of talking, he made horrible faces at the king. The king said, "Stop scaring me and give me a ham sandwich." The messenger opened a bag that hung around his neck and gave the king a sandwich. The king ate it and asked for another one. There was nothing left in the bag except hay. "Give me some hay then," said the king. This is delicious. Now tell me what happened in town." "I'll whisper in your ear," said the messenger. But instead, he shouted at the top of his voice. "They're at it again!" "Who are?" asked Alice. "The lion and the unicorn, of course," said the king. "They are fighting for my crown. Let's go watch." Again, Alice remembered the words of an old song. The lion and the unicorn were fighting for the crown. The lion beat the unicorn all round the town. Some gave them white bread, some gave them brown. Some gave them plum cake and drummed them out of town. They joined a great crowd who were watching the lion and the unicorn's battle. Immediately, the king shouted, "Stop the fighting! 10 minutes allowed for refreshments." The messenger served white bread and brown, but they were very dry. The unicorn said, "Plum cake for me." The messenger took a large cake out of his bag and gave it to Alice. She cut the cake into pieces, but they kept joining together again. Meantime, the lion and the unicorn sat down on each side of the king, who was shaking with fear. Then, the air became filled with the noise of 1,000 drums, and Alice had to cover her ears. The Two Knights. Slowly, the noise stopped and all was silent. No one was in sight, but the cake plate was still there. "So I wasn't dreaming," said Alice. "Or maybe we're all part of a dream." Just then, a knight in red armor galloped up. "You're my prisoner," he cried, and fell off his horse. A white knight arrived too, and he also fell off. Wool and water. Alice caught the shawl, and soon the White Queen came flying through the wood with both arms stretched out. The Queen's clothes were all crooked and full of pins. Alice helped her put her shawl on and smoothed her hair. Just then, the wind caught the Queen's shawl again and blew it across the brook. The Queen spread her arms and flew after it. "I've got it," she cried. "Now I'll pin it on by myself much better." "Better! Better! Bah!" Her voice got higher and higher until she sounded very much like a sheep. Alice looked at the Queen and rubbed her eyes. What had happened? She was in a shop, and a sheep was sitting by a chair knitting. The sheep looked at Alice through a large pair of glasses. "What do you want to buy?" she asked. "May I look all around first?" "You can't look all around unless you have eyes in the back of your head," said the sheep. Every time Alice tried to touch something, it floated away. The sheep was knitting with 14 pairs of needles. "Can you row?" the sheep asked, handing Alice a pair of knitting needles. "Yes, a little, but not with needles." Suddenly, however, they were in a small boat, and the needles had turned into oars. They drifted down the stream for a while until the sheep said again, "Now what do you want to buy?" The boat and the river had all disappeared, and she was back in the little dark shop. "I'd like an egg, please," said Alice. The sheep put Alice's money in a box, but before she could pick up the egg on a shelf, Alice found herself by a brook. Humpty Dumpty. The egg was sitting on top of a high wall with its legs crossed. It had gotten larger and larger, and it had eyes and a nose and a mouth. In fact, it was Humpty Dumpty himself. Alice softly sang to herself. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. "Don't stand there talking to yourself," said Humpty Dumpty. "Tell me your name and your business." "My name is Alice, but—" "It's a stupid name. What does it mean?" "Does it have to mean something?" asked Alice. "Of course," laughed Humpty Dumpty. "Don't you think you'd be safer down on the ground?" said Alice, changing the subject. "Of course I don't think so. If I fall, the king has promised me to send all his horses and all his men," Alice added helpfully. "You've been listening at doors," Humpty Dumpty cried angrily. "No, I haven't," said Alice. "It's in a book." "Oh ho! So they write about me in books? Well, the king promised that all his horses and all his men would pick me up in a minute if I fall." "What a beautiful belt you have," said Alice. "Or is it a cravat?" "Of course it's a cravat, silly child. The White King and Queen gave it to me for an unbirthday present." "What's an unbirthday present?" "It's a present you get when it isn't your birthday." "But I like birthday presents," said Alice. "How many days are there in a year?" asked Humpty Dumpty. 365. "And how many birthdays do you have?" 1. "Well then, there are 364 days you can get unbirthday presents. That's glory for you." "What do you mean by glory?" asked Alice. Humpty Dumpty smiled. "Glory means there's a nice knockdown argument for you." "But glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument," said Alice. "Words mean exactly what I want them to mean," said Humpty Dumpty. "I'm their master. Of course, they do get angry sometimes. Adjectives are easy, but not the verbs. They're the proudest. However, this is all impenetrability." "Oh dear," said Alice. "What does impenetrability mean?" "It means," said